9 days after moving into our dream home, the previous owner called me with a warning that froze my blood. He said he forgot to disconnect a hidden security camera in the library. He told me he saw my husband and his mother doing something unthinkable in the middle of the night. He warned me not to tell my husband and to come to his office alone immediately. My name is Olivia and I am 34 years old. For the past 8 years, I have worked as a senior financial auditor and risk manager for one of the largest corporate firms in downtown Chicago. Before I reveal the sickening truth of what they were doing in the dark, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a toxic family member who tried to destroy your life. My entire career revolves around identifying anomalies, spotting hidden liabilities, and calculating risk. Yet, the greatest fraud I ever encountered was not hidden in an offshore corporate ledger. It was sleeping in my own bed. When Harrison, the 65-year-old retired cybersecurity investigator who sold us our house, made that call, I did not panic. Auditors do not panic. We gather data. I grabbed my keys, told my husband, Gavin, I was running to the grocery store, and drove straight into the biting Chicago wind. The brutal reality of our financial arrangement played on a loop in my mind as I gripped the steering wheel. Purchasing that $1.8 million estate in the upscale Chicago suburbs was supposed to be our fresh start. I had liquidated the entirety of my late father's inheritance to cover exactly 70% of the down payment and closing costs. Gavin, a 35-year-old investment broker who always wore suits that cost more than my first car, had contributed a mere 30%. Despite the massive financial imbalance, Gavin had thrown an absolute tantrum when we signed the paperwork. He manipulated me with harsh accusations that I did not trust our marriage until I finally agreed to put both our names equally on the deed. I had relented to keep the peace. It was the worst miscalculation of my life. When I arrived at Harrison's new condo, he did not offer me coffee or pleasantries. He silently turned his laptop toward me and pressed play. The black and white infrared footage showed my library. The timestamp indicated it was from 2 a.m, the previous night, a time when I had been heavily sedated with cold medicine that Gavin had enthusiastically prepared for me. On the screen, my husband and my 62-year-old mother-in-law, Patricia, were huddled over my personal biometric safe. Patricia is the kind of woman who wears pearls to the grocery store and looks at service workers as if they are a different species. I watched my blood turning to ice as Gavin used a bypass key he had clearly ordered off the internet to click the safe open. Hurry up and grab the inheritance tax documents and her life insurance policy, Patricia hissed on the audio feed. Her voice was dripping with a venomous urgency I had never heard her use in public. We need the exact policy numbers. I have them, Gavin whispered. His face was illuminated by the harsh glow of his phone camera flash as he snapped pictures of my most private financial documents. Are you sure the lawyer can draft the transfer in time? Yes, Patricia replied, snatching the papers from his hand to check them herself. I have already set up the holding company. We will get her to sign the property surrender deed by burying it in your quarterly tax filings. By the time you hand her the divorce papers next month, the house will belong entirely to my company. She will walk out of here with exactly what she brought into this family, which is nothing. I sat in Harrison's office, staring at the frozen frame of my husband, smiling as he plotted to leave me destitute. They were not just stealing my money. They were actively plotting to steal my late father's life savings, strip me of my home, and throw me onto the street. The sheer sociopathy of it was breathtaking. Most wives would have burst into tears. They would have driven home, screamed, thrown plates, and demanded an explanation. But I am an auditor. When an auditor discovers massive fraud, they do not warn the criminals. They quietly seal the exits and build a federal case. Harrison, I said, my voice eerily calm and devoid of any tremble. Can you transfer this raw file to an encrypted flash drive for me and please officially wipe it from your cloud? Harrison looked at me with a mixture of profound pity and deep respect. He told me it was already done, but warned me to be careful, saying, a man who steals from his wife in the dark will do far worse if he is cornered in the light. He will not be cornered, I replied, taking the flash drive and dropping it into my designer purse. He will not even know the walls are closing in until the oxygen is gone. I drove back to the estate, my mind processing millions of variables per second. If Gavin and Patricia were brazen enough to orchestrate a fraudulent real estate transfer, what else were they hiding? I needed access, leverage, and an ally on the inside. I did not just want my house back. I wanted to financially and legally annihilate them so thoroughly that they would never manipulate anyone again. As I pulled into my driveway, I expected to see Gavin's sedan. Instead, I saw a massive commercial moving truck idling on my paving stones. Two burly movers were carrying a hideous velvet antique sofa through my front doors. Before I could put the car in park, Patricia walked out onto my porch, holding a mug of my imported tea, looking at me with the smug smile of a parasite that had just found a new host. The war had not just begun. The enemy had already breached the gates. I stepped out of my car. The biting chill of the Chicago air matching the temperature of my blood. I walked briskly up the driveway, deliberately keeping my expression perfectly neutral. "Patricia," I said, pausing at the base of the marble steps. "What is going on here? Why are there moving trucks at my house?" Patricia took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea, looking down at me from the elevated porch as if I were a confused delivery driver. "Oh, Olivia, darling," she said with exaggerated sweetness. "Did Gavin not call you? My condo had a terrible plumbing issue this morning. Black water everywhere. It is completely unlivable. I told Gavin it made perfect sense for me to stay here in the master guest suite until the renovations are done. It is such a massive house. Surely you will not even notice I am here." I looked past her into the grand foyer. The movers were not just carrying a few suitcases for an emergency stay. They were unloading an entire household of heavy, oppressive antique furniture. Towering armwires, massive dressers, and dozens of heavy boxes were being wheeled through my front doors. This was not a temporary refuge from a plumbing leak. This was an invasion. It was the physical manifestation of the conversation I had just watched her have with my husband at 2 o'clock in the morning on a hidden camera. She was moving in to establish residency and oversee the hostile takeover of my property. Gavin stepped out of the front door wearing his expensive weekend cashmere, looking perfectly relaxed. "Hey babe," he said, walking down the steps to kiss my cheek. I had to force every muscle in my body not to violently recoil from his touch. "Mom is going through a really stressful time with the condo," Gavin continued smoothly. "I knew you would not mind. Family takes care of family, right?" "Of course," I smiled, giving them a tight, practiced expression that did not reach my eyes. "Family is everything." I walked past them into the foyer and stopped dead in my tracks. My late father, a master craftsman who had worked with his hands his entire life, had built a beautiful custom cherrywood console table just for me. It was the centerpiece of my entryway, and it held immense sentimental value. It was gone. In its place stood a gaudy gold-leafed Victorian table that looked like it belonged in a cheap historical reenactment. "Patricia," I said, keeping my voice terrifyingly calm. "Where is my father's console table?" Patricia waved her hand dismissively from the doorway. "Oh, that old clunky wooden thing. It completely ruined the aesthetic of the foyer. Olivia, this is a luxury estate, not a rustic farm. I had the movers carry it out to the dumpster in the alley. It is where it belongs. Do not worry, my replica piece elevates the space much better." A blinding flash of rage hit behind my eyes. She had thrown away the last piece of furniture my dead father had ever built for me. She threw it in a dumpster to assert her dominance, to mark her territory like a wild animal marking its turf. I looked at Gavin. He stood there leaning against the wall, scrolling through his phone, completely unfazed by his mother's blatant disrespect. "Mom has an eye for interior design," Gavin muttered without looking up from his screen. "Just let her handle the decor. You're always so busy with your spreadsheets anyway. Let her make this house a home." They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to scream, to cry, To throw a hysterical fit so Gavin could point his finger and call me unstable so he could build a narrative for the impending divorce that I was hostile and unhinged. I looked at the gold table. I looked at Patricia's triumphant mocking sneer. And then I did the most terrifying thing a woman can do when she has been pushed to the absolute limit. I smiled, a slow, wide, chilling smile. "You are absolutely right, Patricia," I said, my voice as smooth as silk. "The house does need a structural upgrade. Make yourself completely comfortable. I want you to treat this house exactly as if it were your own." Patricia looked slightly taken back by my easy capitulation, but her arrogance quickly masked her confusion. "I am glad you are finally seeing reason. Now be a dear and tell the movers to put the Persian rugs in the east wing." I turned and walked upstairs to my private office, locking the solid oak door behind me. I did not cry for my father's table. Tears are a waste of hydration when you are preparing for war. I pulled out my secure work laptop, booted up an encrypted virtual private network, and made a highly specialized phone call. "Vanguard Security Solutions," a gruff voice answered. "I need a premium residential installation," I said quietly, pacing the length of my office. "I am the primary deed holder of a property. I want micro-lens audio and video surveillance installed immediately. I want cameras hidden in the kitchen, the living rooms, the dining room, the hallways, and the exterior perimeters. I want them hardwired, totally invisible, and operating on a closed encrypted cellular network that does not touch my home internet connection." "That is an invasive package, ma'am," the dispatcher replied. "It is going to run you about $12,000 for expedited discreet installation." "I do not care what it costs," I replied, staring out the window at Patricia's moving truck below. "I want your elite technicians here tomorrow at 9 in the morning, disguised as a smart home heating and cooling upgrade crew. My husband and mother-in-law will be at brunch. You will have exactly 3 hours to secure the premises." Under Illinois law, a homeowner can legally install security cameras in the common areas of their own property without the consent of other residents. The only restriction is that they cannot be placed in areas with a reasonable expectation of privacy, like bathrooms or private bedrooms. I was not breaking the law. I was leveraging it to capture the criminals who were currently sitting in my living room. Over the next 48 hours, I played the role of the perfect, accommodating, naive wife. I fetched Patricia her tea. I ironed Gavin's shirts. I smiled while they subtly insulted my cooking, my career, and my wardrobe. Patricia would make snide comments about how my professional attire looked too rigid for a woman who should be focusing on starting a family. Gavin would laugh and agree, deliberately, undermining me in my own home. I absorbed every microaggression without flinching. And while they mocked my financial obsession, Vanguard's elite technicians wired my home into the most sophisticated surveillance trap money could buy. They seamlessly integrated the tiny lenses into smoke detectors, crown molding, and air vents. Every hushed conversation, every late-night plotting session, every time Gavin opened his laptop on the kitchen island, I was going to see it. I was going to hear it in crystal clear high definition. The cameras went live on Tuesday evening. I sat in my locked office watching the high-defin feeds populate on my monitor. I watched Patricia walk into the kitchen, pour herself a massive glass of my expensive wine and pull out her cell phone. I cranked up the audio feed to listen to her next move. Rachel, Patricia was saying to Gavin's sister on the phone. "The idiot did not even fight me on the furniture. She is completely clueless. I told Gavin, we bring you and DeAndre into the guest house by Friday. Once we get her out, the whole family will live here for free." I leaned back in my leather chair, a cold smirk playing on my lips. They were bringing in more parasites. But as they were about to find out, inviting a brilliant, financially abused black architect into a house full of arrogant racist manipulators was not going to strengthen their army. It was going to hand me the ultimate weapon. 3 days later, the second wave of the invasion began. I sat at the marble island in the kitchen, sipping black coffee and pretending to review a risk assessment. In reality, I was secretly monitoring the audio feed from the driveway via my wireless earbuds. Through the bay windows, I watched a battered moving truck sputter to a halt near the sprawling guest house at the back of my property. Out stepped Rachel, Gavin's younger sister, clutching a designer handbag that cost more than the rental truck. From the driver's side emerged DeAndre, her husband. DeAndre was an African-American architect, brilliant, soft-spoken, and possessing a quiet dignity that starkly contrasted with the arrogant, chaotic energy of the family he had married into. DeAndre began hauling heavy boxes from the back of the truck, his broad shoulders straining under the weight. Rachel stood to the side, complaining loudly about the humidity and checking her manicured nails. Patricia and Gavin strolled out of the main house to greet them. I turned up the volume on my hidden exterior microphone. "Well, look who finally arrived," Patricia announced, holding her inevitable glass of midday wine. She did not hug DeAndre. She barely looked at him. "Rachel, darling, the guest house has been completely aired out for you. It is a bit rustic compared to the main estate, but beggars cannot be choosers, can they?" I knew the backstory, though I was not supposed to. Months ago, Patricia had aggressively manipulated DeAndre into selling the beautiful historic starter home he had meticulously renovated with his own hands. She convinced him to funnel $150,000 of equity into Gavin's elite brokerage firm as a high-yield investment. Gavin promised a 20% return within 6 months. Instead, the money vanished, swallowed by the market, or so Gavin claimed. Now, DeAndre and Rachel were essentially homeless, bankrupt, and forced to live as dependent on Patricia's supposed charity in my backyard. Gavin leaned against the stone pillar of the patio, swirling his scotch, watching DeAndre lift a massive crate of books. "Careful with that, DeAndre," Gavin sneered. His voice was laced with that specific insidious brand of corporate racism, the kind disguised as a joke, but deliberately designed to humiliate. "That box is probably worth more than your architecture degree right now. Try not to drop it. We do not need you damaging the pavement. I already have a landscaper for that." Rachel actually giggled at her own husband being degraded. "Oh, stop it, Gavin," she said lightly. "DeAndre is strong. Let him work. It builds character." I watched DeAndre through the window. He did not say a word. He did not drop the box. But I saw his jaw clenched so hard a muscle twitched violently in his cheek. I saw the profound simmering rage in his dark eyes. It was the heavy suffocating anger of a man who realized he was trapped in a den of vipers, completely isolated, stripped of his assets, and reduced to the role of a hired hand by the very people who robbed him. He carried the box into the guest house. He was enduring the humiliation because he thought he had no leverage, no money, and nowhere to go. I took a slow sip of my coffee. In the corporate auditing world, we have a term called insider threat. It refers to a security risk that originates from within the targeted organization. DeAndre was not a threat to me. He was the perfect, highly intelligent, profoundly motivated insider threat to Gavin and Patricia. I did not just need a victim. I needed an operative. Later that evening, the house was quiet. Gavin had gone to the office for a late meeting, which my tracking app confirmed was actually an upscale steakhouse downtown. Patricia was asleep in the master guest suite after her third bottle of wine. I walked out the back door carrying a thermos of hot coffee and made my way across the manicured lawn toward the guest house. The lights were dim, but I saw a silhouette sitting alone on the small wooden porch. It was DeAndre. He was staring out into the darkness, a half-empty water bottle dangling loosely from his fingers. "It gets cold out here at night," I said softly, stepping into the dim pool of porch light. DeAndre jumped slightly quickly, masking his exhaustion with a polite, guarded smile. "Olivia." "Hey," he said, standing up. "Sorry, I did not mean to intrude. Rachel is asleep. I just needed some air. We will be out of your hair soon, I promise. Just until I can secure a loan for a new place." I sat down on the wooden step next to him, handing him the thermos. "Drink this," I offered. "You look like you have not slept in 3 days." He took it hesitantly. "Thanks," he murmured. He took a sip, the warmth clearly easing some tension in his shoulders. "I really appreciate you letting us stay in the guest house, Olivia. I know it is a massive imposition. Things have not exactly gone according to plan lately." "I know about the $150,000, DeAndre," I said flatly. He froze. The thermos halted halfway to his mouth. He looked at me, a flash of deep shame crossing his features. "Gavin told you?" he asked. "Gavin tells me nothing," I replied, my voice dropping to a cool conspiratorial whisper. "Gavin lies as easily as he breathes. And Patricia orchestrates the lies to keep everyone under her thumb." I turned to look him dead in the eye. "DeAndre, you are a brilliant architect. You rebuilt a historic home from the foundation up. You are a man of logic and structure. Do you really believe a senior investment broker simply lost $150,000 of family money in a standard market dip without producing a single transparent portfolio statement?" DeAndre swallowed hard. The guarded politeness vanished, replaced by a raw, desperate intensity. "I asked for the transaction records," he whispered, looking toward the main house to ensure no one was listening. "I asked for the audit trail. Gavin told me I was being financially illiterate and that asking for receipts was an insult to family trust." Rachel took his side. "She told me to stop embarrassing her." "They stole your money, DeAndre," I said, hitting him with the cold, hard truth he already suspected, but was too manipulated to accept. "Just like they are currently trying to steal this house from me." He stared at me, his eyes widening in the darkness. "What do you mean steal the house?" he asked. "Your name is on the deed." "For now," I said. "They are manufacturing a fraudulent property surrender deed to transfer my equity into a shell company controlled by Patricia. They plan to blindside me with divorce papers and an eviction notice simultaneously." DeAndre let out a breath that sounded like a curse. He dragged a hand down his face, the reality of the sociopathy he had married into fully taking hold. "My God, they are monsters. What are you going to do?" he asked. "You have to get a lawyer. You have to run." "I am an auditor, DeAndre," I said, a dangerous razor-sharp smile cutting across my face. "I do not run from bad ledgers. I burn them to the ground." I leaned closer, the chill wind whipping my hair. "I am building a federal case against my husband and his mother. Wire fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. But Gavin keeps his physical offline ledger in his home office safe. I need a ghost. I need someone who lives on this property who Gavin dismisses as a hired hand to walk into that office and plant a digital cloner on his desktop while I distract them." I held out my hand. "Help me destroy them, DeAndre. Help me pull the financial logs. If we prove the embezzlement, I guarantee I will claw back your money from his seized assets before the federal agents take the rest." DeAndre looked at my outstretched hand. He looked back at the main house where the people who had stolen his home mocked his race and humiliated him daily were sleeping comfortably. The hesitation vanished from his eyes, replaced by the cold, calculating focus of a man ready for war. He reached out and gripped my hand firmly. "Tell me exactly what we need to do." Under the cover of night, I laid out the initial phase of our operation to DeAndre on the back porch of the guest house. I detailed the network of hidden cameras and microphones I installed, ensuring him, Gavin, and Patricia were oblivious to their reality as surveillance subjects. We established a secure encrypted messaging app on our secondary phones, a sophisticated system. And Gavin's rudimentary tech skills would never be able to detect or trace back to us. DeAndre agreed to play the subservient brother-in-law perfectly effectively, becoming invisible background noise in their daily arrogant lives, so he could move freely around the estate without raising any suspicion whatsoever. By 7 the next morning, Patricia was demanding breakfast. Sitting in my home office, I checked the camera feeds on my dual monitors. Gavin stood in the kitchen aggressively typing on his phone while ignoring his mother's complaints. This was our window. I sent a single emoji to DeAndre. Downstairs, DeAndre walked through the back door carrying a toolbox. He politely announced to Patricia he was checking the weather stripping near Gavin's office, playing into her narrative that he was mere unpaid maintenance staff. Patricia waved him off, too busy critiquing the organic eggs I purchased. I watched DeAndre through the hallway camera. He moved with the deliberate grace of a man who knew what was at stake. When Gavin stepped into the pantry to yell on a call, I tapped the microphone icon on my secure app, speaking directly into DeAndre's hidden wireless earpiece. "The target is clear," I whispered. "Enter the office. The desktop tower is right of his mahogany desk." DeAndre slipped inside, leaving the door cracked to appear innocent. Kneeling beside the wooden desk, he slid his hand behind the computer tower. He produced the USB data cloner I programmed the night before, a specialized piece of auditing hardware designed to bypass operating system locks and mirror hard drives silently. "Drive is in," DeAndre murmured, his voice barely registering on the audio feed. I held my breath tightly, watching the progress bar creeping forward on my terminal interface. Gavin was still in the pantry arguing loudly about a stalled wire transfer. His arrogance was staggering. He conducted fraudulent business calls loudly in my kitchen, confident in his absolute control. 30 seconds passed, then 60. The progress bar crept toward 90%. Suddenly, Gavin slammed the pantry door and walked briskly toward his office. "Abort." I snapped into the microphone. "He is coming. Pull it now." DeAndre yanked the USB drive, slipping it into his palm. He immediately grabbed a screwdriver and turned to the baseboard heating vent just as Gavin pushed the door open. "What are you doing in here?" Gavin demanded aggressively. "Patricia complained about a draft," DeAndre replied smoothly. "I am tightening the vent covers so the heating system runs more efficiently," Gavin scoffed, dropping into his leather chair. "We'll finish up and get out. I have actual work to do." DeAndre gathered his tools and exited. 10 minutes later, a soft knock sounded at my locked office door. I opened it to find DeAndre holding out his hand. The silver USB drive rested in his palm. I took it with a silent nod of profound gratitude. The Trojan horse was inside the gates. I locked the door, sat at my specialized auditing terminal, and plugged in the drive. It was time to wake up the auditor. Gavin was driven by ego, meaning his security protocols were predictably arrogant. He used variations of his birthday, his mother's maiden name, and his fraternity year. It took my decryptor software less than 4 minutes to slice through his password manager. Once inside, the entire landscape of his financial life unspooled across my screens in a cascading waterfall of raw data. Starting with our joint accounts, I cross-referenced the bank statements he had physically printed against the actual digital ledgers. A sharp cold fury washed over me. Gavin had been doctoring the PDFs for over a year. He systematically drained our shared savings, siphoning thousands each week into a holding account under a different name. He had completely depleted our emergency fund, masking the withdrawals as legitimate tax payments and contractor fees. But that was just the surface. Auditors do not just look at where money goes. We look at how it travels. Tracing the routing numbers from his hidden holding account, I found the destination. Gavin had established an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. He was stockpiling liquid cash, preparing to leave me with a massive mortgage, an empty bank account, and a fabricated mountain of debt. Digging deeper, I opened a folder labeled with DeAndre's last name. Inside were wire transfer receipts for the $150,000 DeAndre and Rachel had entrusted to Gavin. Gavin had not lost that money in a market dip. Transaction logs showed he never even invested it. The moment DeAndre's funds hit the brokerage account, Gavin immediately diverted them. My eyes widened following the digital trail. Gavin had not sent it to the Cayman Islands. He wired it directly into a high-risk margin trading account under his own name. He used his brother-in-law's entire life savings to place a reckless leveraged bet on a volatile tech stock. The bet failed spectacularly, wiping out the entire sum in less than 48 hours. Gavin incinerated DeAndre's home equity on a gamble, then smoothly blamed the broader market. The sheer scale of his deception was dizzying, painting a clear picture of a desperate man. A man making frantic high leverage bets is trying to cover up a much larger, more dangerous deficit. I leaned closer to the monitor, opening his corporate brokerage files. If he was willing to steal from his wife and his family to cover his tracks, what was he doing with his wealthy client's money? The answer I was about to discover as the final files unencrypted was a massive federal crime. As the final progress bar reached 100%, a hidden digital partition materialized on my dual monitors. The folder was labeled with a generic string of alphanumeric characters, a pathetic attempt to camouflage what lay inside. I clicked the icon and a sprawling architecture of corporate financial records flooded my screen. These were not our personal bank statements. These were the highly confidential proprietary client ledgers from Gavin's elite brokerage firm. My eyes scanned the columns of data, shifting into the analytical mindset that made me a top-tier risk manager. I initially expected to find evidence of minor commission skimming or slightly inflated expense reports to hide his spending. What I uncovered was a sophisticated, desperate shell game of epic proportions. Gavin managed portfolios for high net worth individuals, mostly generational wealth trusts, and wealthy retirees who rarely checked their daily balances. He had been entrusted with their life savings, their security, and their futures. Instead of placing their funds in the conservative blue-chip investments they requested, Gavin had been systematically draining their liquid cash. He transferred massive sums into a master slush fund, a shadow account operating completely outside his firm's compliance oversight. He used this shadow account to fund his own reckless obsession with high-risk options trading. He was essentially treating his clients' hard-earned retirement funds as his personal casino chips, betting wildly on market fluctuations. The transaction logs painted a horrifying picture of a man spiraling completely out of control. Gavin was shorting aggressive tech stocks and buying massive leverage derivatives, chasing impossible payouts to stroke his massive ego. When the market inevitably swung against him, the resulting margin calls were brutal and unrelenting. To prevent the brokerage from automatically liquidating his positions and exposing his unauthorized trades, he siphoned even more money from dormant client accounts to cover the massive deficits. The deficit numbers were absolutely staggering. He had not just lost DeAndre's $150,000 in a bad trade. He had incinerated over $4 million of client money in the past 18 months alone. To hide the catastrophic losses from both his firm and his unsuspecting clients, Gavin utilized the exact same deceptive tactic he used on our joint savings. He generated fraudulent quarterly statements using manipulated accounting software. He intercepted the digital reporting system, replacing the real devastating portfolio values with entirely fabricated returns. His clients genuinely thought they were earning a steady 8% annual yield on their safe investments. In reality, their portfolios were gutted shells holding nothing but toxic debt and empty promises. The sheer audacity of his ongoing embezzlement was staggering. He was committing textbook wire fraud, securities fraud, and aggravated identity theft on a daily basis. The moment the Securities and Exchange Commission or the Federal Bureau of Investigation caught wind of this deception, Gavin would face decades in federal prison. Suddenly, the entire invasion of my home made perfect chilling sense. Patricia moving in the gaudy antique furniture, the aggressive push to secure the property surrender deed before the end of the month. I leaned back in my leather chair, the scattered puzzle pieces finally clicking together in my mind to reveal a terrifying portrait of survival at my expense. Gavin fully knew his corporate Ponzi scheme was on the absolute verge of collapsing. A simple routine audit by his firm or a single wealthy client requesting a massive cash withdrawal would trigger a catastrophic implosion. Once federal agents raided his office, every single asset tied to his name would be frozen and seized by the government to pay back the defrauded investors. Our house, the $1.88 million estate I had funded almost entirely with my father's hard-earned money, was the only clean, untainted asset he had left to his name. Patricia was not just trying to steal my home out of spite, dominance, or maternal greed. She and Gavin were executing a highly calculated asset protection strategy to save themselves from ruin. By forcing me to sign that property transfer document under false pretenses, they intended to move the estate into Patricia's holding company, completely shielding it from federal seizure. They were deliberately setting me up to take the fall, leaving me penniless and potentially liable, while they secured a luxury fortress paid for by my dead father. I felt no panic, only the sharp, hyper-focused clarity of an auditor methodically closing the ultimate trap. I began systematically ripping the data from the cloned drive to my secure server. I exported the routing hashes, the fabricated client portfolios, and the damning internal emails Gavin had foolishly saved to his local hard drive. I created encrypted, compressed archives of every single fraudulent wire transfer, meticulously tagging them with the corresponding federal statutes he had blatantly violated. I was no longer just preparing for a nasty, heavily contested divorce. I was compiling a comprehensive federal dossier that would guarantee my husband left my house wearing handcuffs. I organized the irrefutable evidence into two distinct vaults on my secure network. One vault was for my high-powered divorce attorney, containing the definitive proof of his marital financial abuse and deception. The second, much larger vault was destined for the white-collar crime division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Enforcement Division of the Internal Revenue Service. As I finished encrypting the final batch of corporate ledgers, a small recurring charge on Gavin's personal credit card statement caught my trained eye. It was a monthly fee for a premium credit monitoring service, but the account number did not match his known credentials. I ran the digits through my terminal. My breath caught in my throat as the search results populated. The account was tied directly to my personal social security number, a number Gavin had memorized years ago. The financial betrayal did not stop at his firm or our joint savings. The monster I married was digging an entirely different grave with my name on it. I immediately opened a secure browser window and navigated directly to the annual credit report portal. As a financial auditor, maintaining a pristine credit score of over 800 was not just a point of personal pride. It was a strict professional requirement for my corporate security clearance. If my credit plummeted, my firm could legally revoke my auditing credentials and terminate my employment. Gavin knew this better than anyone. I entered my social security number, answered the mandatory identity verification questions, and requested full reports from all three major bureaus. The screens loaded simultaneously. I stared at the dashboard, feeling a sudden violent drop in my blood pressure. My flawless 820 credit score no longer existed. The bright green dial I had meticulously maintained since college had plummeted into the dark red zone, hovering at a dismal 510. A bright red alert banner flashed across the top of my screen, warning of severe delinquency and high credit utilization. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I drilled down into the raw data. There were 3 new high-yield credit lines opened in my name over the last 7 months. The first was a platinum travel card with a $50,000 limit. The second was a premium retail card maxed out at $35,000. The third was a personal signature loan drawn for an even $40,000. A total of $125,000 of unsecured debt was strapped directly to my social security number. Every single account was maxed out to the limit and 60 days past due. I pulled the individual transaction histories, parsing the data with ruthless precision. The purchases were sickening. The travel card was littered with charges for luxury hotel suites in downtown Chicago, expensive jewelry boutiques, and thousands in high-end dining. Gavin was not just funding his options trading deficit. He was financing a lavish hidden lifestyle. He was likely funding his affair, pampering himself, and living like a king, all while permanently tethering the financial liability to my name. The sheer cruelty of the strategy became devastatingly clear. This was not a simple cash grab. This was calculated financial murder. By systematically destroying my credit score and burying me under 6 figures of toxic debt, Gavin was ensuring that when he dropped the divorce papers, I would be completely paralyzed. With a destroyed credit score, I would not be able to qualify for a mortgage to buy a new house. I would not even be approved to rent a decent apartment. No reputable divorce attorney would accept me as a client without a massive retainer I could no longer access. Most maliciously by triggering a default on my credit. He was actively orchestrating the termination of my corporate auditing career. He wanted me homeless, jobless, and utterly defenseless. He thought he was a criminal mastermind playing a brilliant game of chess against a naive wife. He severely underestimated the woman sitting across the board. I switched my terminal over to my forensic software suite and began ripping the metadata from the credit applications. Criminals always leave a digital fingerprint, and Gavin was sloppy. The Internet Protocol addresses used to originate the 3 credit card applications matched our home network router perfectly. However, the billing address associated with the accounts was not our home in the suburbs. It was a private post office box registered in the next county over. I ran a quick background query on the registration. The owner of the post office box was Patricia. The mother and son duo had worked in perfect synchronization. Gavin used my social security number to open the fraudulent lines of credit from his home office, and Patricia intercepted the physical mail, ensuring no overdue notices ever arrived at our front door. I carefully downloaded every protocol log, application timestamp, and transaction record. I merged this evidence into the encrypted vault designated for the federal authorities. Identity theft is a federal offense carrying mandatory minimum prison sentences. My hands were completely steady as I placed a hard security freeze on all 3 of my credit profiles. I initiated a specialized silent fraud alert through a backdoor channel available to certified risk managers. This type of alert flags the accounts internally for federal review without triggering automated email notifications to the account holder. Gavin would have absolutely no idea that the accounts were frozen or that an investigation had been triggered. He would assume his trap was fully set and waiting for him to spring it at his convenience. I sat back in my chair and looked at the glowing monitors illuminating my dark office. The depth of the betrayal was no longer just about money or real estate. It was an intimate violation of my identity, an aggressive attempt to erase my independence entirely. They looked at me and saw nothing but a resource to be drained and discarded. But a resource is passive. A resource does not fight back. I closed my laptop. The screen going black, leaving the room in shadows. My father had spent his entire life building the wealth that paid for this house. I had spent my adult life building a spotless career and an unshakable reputation. Gavin and Patricia believed they could simply take a match to it all and walk away warm from the fire. They were terribly wrong. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my tailored trousers. The reconnaissance phase of my operation was officially complete. I had the map of their entire criminal empire. Now it was time to assemble my strike team. It was time to go back out to the guest house, look DeAndre in the eye, and forge a blood pact. I slipped out the back door, the night air biting my cheeks. The guest house stood at the property edge. A light glowed from the kitchen. Rachel was a heavy sleeper. DeAndre operated on the energy of a man realizing his life had been hijacked. I knocked lightly. DeAndre pulled the door open, dressed in sweatpants. He looked exhausted, dark circles prominent under his eyes. He stepped aside, letting me into the cramped space. We stood in the tiny kitchen, the silence heavy. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a thick envelope, and placed it on the counter. "What is that?" he asked. "That is the truth," I replied. "I found the ledgers." "Open it." DeAndre hesitated. His hands hovered over the paper. He had spent months being manipulated by his wife and her family, told he was financially illiterate. Opening that envelope meant confronting reality. He broke the seal and pulled out the documents. The top page was the wire transfer receipt from his home sale. It showed $150,000 leaving his account. DeAndre stared at it. "Look at the routing numbers on the second page," I instructed. "Look exactly where your money landed." He flipped the page. His eyes scanned the highlighted rows. He read the destination details again, his breathing growing shallow. "This is a personal margin account," he whispered. "Gavin told me he was placing funds in a corporate bond portfolio. This document says the account belongs to Gavin." "It gets worse," I said. "Turn to the third page." DeAndre flipped the paper. The third sheet was a detailed transaction log from Gavin's personal trading platform. It chronicled the exact 48 hours following the deposit. He did not invest your equity, DeAndre explained. He took your entire life savings and threw it into a highly leveraged, aggressive short position on a volatile tech stock. The market rallied. The stock price skyrocketed. Gavin's position was liquidated instantly by the broker to cover the massive margin call. Your money was not lost in a standard market dip. It was incinerated in 2 days because your brother-in-law is a degenerate gambler playing with stolen funds. DeAndre dropped the papers on the counter. He gripped the edge of the laminate surface so hard his knuckles turned a pale ashen gray. His chest heaved as he fought to control the violent surge of adrenaline coursing through his body. He had worked grueling 80-hour weeks for 4 years to restore that house. He had poured his blood, his sweat, and his absolute soul into building a foundation for his family. Rachel and her mother had systematically dismantled his pride, convincing him to surrender his security to Gavin. They played me, he breathed, his voice trembling with a mixture of profound grief and pure unadulterated rage. Rachel looked me in the eye and told me I was stupid for questioning her brother. She knew. She had to know. Rachel is complicit by willful ignorance, I replied. She prefers the comfort of her family's wealth over the integrity of her marriage. They look at you the exact same way they look at me, DeAndre. We are not family to them. We are fuel. We are resources to be extracted, consumed, and discarded when we demand respect. Gavin is currently attempting to transfer the deed of my house into Patricia's name while simultaneously destroying my credit score with fraudulent loans. They want us both entirely broken. DeAndre turned to face me. The polite, accommodating architect was gone. The man standing in front of me possessed a dangerous, terrifying clarity. What is the plan? He asked. I need to completely secure the federal evidence against Gavin, I explained. I have the digital logs from his home network, but the federal agents will need hard corroboration from his corporate terminal to prove the embezzlement of client funds. If I try to access his firm's network remotely, their enterprise firewalls will flag the intrusion and Gavin will have time to destroy the physical evidence. I need a physical breach. DeAndre's eyes narrowed as he processed the logistical requirements. Gavin's firm is highly secure. You need key card access and biometric clearance. Just to get on the executive floor. I know, I said, but you are currently the lead architectural consultant redesigning the interior layout for the managing partner of that exact firm. Gavin bragged about securing that contract for you at dinner last month. You have temporary contractor clearance. You have a legitimate, unquestionable reason to be walking those halls after business hours. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a sleek black external drive. I placed it on the counter next to the damning financial documents. This is an automated data extraction tool, I said quietly. It is programmed to run a silent background script. I need you to walk into Gavin's corner office while you are doing your architectural measurements. You plug this into the back of his primary desktop. It will take exactly 4 minutes to clone the encrypted client ledgers and the offshore routing numbers. Then you pull it out and walk away entirely unseen. DeAndre stared at the small black device. It was the key to his vengeance and my instrument of justice. If he was caught, his career would be jeopardized. If he succeeded, we would possess the nuclear launch codes to annihilate the monsters who had ruined us both. If I do this, DeAndre said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. I want your absolute word on one thing. When the federal agents freeze his accounts, you ensure my $150,000 is legally separated from the seizure pool. I want my money back before the government takes the rest. You have my absolute word. I promised, looking him directly in the eye. You will get every single penny back, and Rachel will walk away with absolutely nothing. DeAndre reached out and picked up the drive. The pact was legally sealed. I slipped back across the dark expanse of the lawn, the freezing Chicago wind biting through my thin jacket. The lights in the main house were completely entirely off now. Gavin was still downtown at his fake meeting, and Patricia was deeply asleep in her luxurious stolen suite. I locked the back door quietly and made my way up the sweeping staircase to my office. The digital traps were set. The physical operative was deployed. And now I had to prepare for the psychological warfare that Gavin was about to unleash. Sitting at my desk, I unlocked the bottom drawer and pulled out a small velvet-lined box. Inside lay a specialized tool that most people outside of elite forensic accounting circles never encounter. It looked exactly like a premium standard-issue blue ballpoint pen. It possessed the same weight, the same metallic finish, and the same smooth ink flow as any expensive writing instrument a corporate executive might use. However, the chemical composition of the ink was fundamentally different. It was a proprietary fraud prevention tool utilized during high sting operations. The ink reacted to ambient air and normal room temperatures. Within exactly 24 hours of application, the chemical bonds would completely break down. The ink would evaporate without leaving a single microscopic trace on the paper. A signature rendered with this pen would simply cease to exist, leaving a blank, legally void document in its wake. I placed the pen on the exact center of my desk pad. The trap was ready. Now I just had to wait for the mouse to take the cheese. The opportunity arrived the very next evening. I was sitting in my office reviewing legitimate risk assessment files for my firm when I heard Gavin's heavy footsteps approaching down the hallway. He pushed the door open without knocking. He carried a thick, disorganized stack of paperwork clutched in his hand, his tie loosened, his hair perfectly tousled to project the image of an exhausted, hard-working provider. It was a performance he had perfected over the years. "Hey babe," he sighed heavily, dropping the massive stack of papers directly onto my keyboard. "I am so incredibly swamped. Compliance is breathing down my neck about our joint quarterly tax disclosures. My accountant needs these signed and filed by tomorrow morning or we are going to face a massive penalty." I looked at the stack. It was easily 70 pages thick. A chaotic jumble of investment disclosures, standard tax forms, and dense legal jargon designed to cause immediate eye fatigue. This is a classic predatory tactic in financial fraud. Criminals bury the lethal document deep within a mountain of boring, repetitive paperwork, relying on the victim's exhaustion and trust to secure a blind signature. "That is a lot of paperwork for a standard quarterly filing, Gavin," I said, keeping my voice mild and completely unbothered. "Do you want me to read through these tonight and give them back to you in the morning?" Gavin instantly shifted his weight, his body language tightening with manufactured impatience. "Liv, I literally just said the accountant needs them first thing tomorrow. I have to scan them tonight. It is just the standard joint asset declarations. We sign them every single year. Do not make a huge production out of this. I am exhausted and I just want to go to bed." He stepped closer, leaning over my desk, casting a shadow over my workspace. His physical proximity was a deliberate intimidation tactic. He was trying to rush me, boxing me in so I would not have the time or space to actually read what I was signing. "Of course," I replied smoothly. "Show me where you need my signature." I reached out and picked up the specialized blue pen from my desk pad. I clicked the top. Gavin let out a loud dramatic sigh of relief, completely oblivious to his impending doom. He leaned over the stack and began rapidly flipping through the pages. "Sign here," he instructed, pointing to a standard tax declaration line. I signed it. The blue ink flowed beautifully. He flipped another 20 pages. "And here," he said, I signed again. He flipped another 10 pages. The rapid rhythmic sound of paper turning filled the quiet office. Then he paused. He turned to page 47, his hand slightly obscuring the top header of the document. "Just one more right here at the bottom," he muttered, trying to sound entirely disinterested. My trained eyes scanned the visible text in a fraction of a second. I did not need to see the header. I recognized the formatting, the specific legal clauses, and the notary stamp box at the bottom. It was a quitclaim deed, a legally binding document that irrevocably surrenders a person's ownership interest in a piece of real estate. Buried right in the middle of a mundane tax filing was the exact instrument they intended to use to strip me of my $1.8 million home. The deed listed my name as the grantor and a limited liability company as the grantee. Patricia's company. Gavin tapped the signature line with his index finger. Right there, Liv. Let us get this done. I looked up at him. His eyes were wide, attempting to project innocent exhaustion. But I saw the dark predatory gleam lurking just beneath the surface. He was holding his breath. He thought he was brilliant. He thought he had outsmarted a senior financial auditor. I smiled warmly at my husband. Anything to help you out, honey? I pressed the tip of the disappearing ink pen to the thick paper. I signed my name with a beautiful elaborate flourish. I made sure to press firmly, ensuring the signature looked absolute and definitive. Perfect. Gavin gasped. He snatched the document so fast he nearly tore the paper. He tapped the stack against the desk to align the edges. A genuine euphoric grin finally breaking through his exhausted facade. Thanks, babe. You are a lifesaver. I will handle all the filing. You just relax. He turned and practically sprinted out of my office, shutting the door behind him. I sat in the silence, listening to his rapid footsteps retreating down the hallway toward Patricia's suite. I could picture them now high-fiving in the master bedroom, celebrating their flawless victory over the naive, trusting wife. They probably thought they had just secured a multi-million-dollar asset for the cost of a few printed pages. I picked up my pen, clicked it shut, and placed it carefully back into the velvet-lined drawer. I locked the drawer with a quiet click. Gavin would undoubtedly hand the document over to his mother tonight. Patricia would likely lock it in her briefcase, planning to drive downtown to the county clerk's office the following morning to officially record the transfer of the deed. But by the time the clerk opened that file, exactly 24 hours would have passed. Patricia would pull out page 47 with a triumphant sneer, only to hand the government official a completely blank piece of paper. They thought they were playing chess. They had no idea they were sitting at a table that I owned, playing a game that I had rigged from the very beginning. The psychological destruction of my husband was officially underway, and tomorrow, DeAndre was going to strike the fatal blow. The next morning broke with a heavy blanket of gray clouds hanging over the Chicago skyline. I sat at my kitchen island sipping coffee and watching DeAndre pack his architectural blueprints into his leather messenger bag. He wore a crisp tailored suit overlaid with a high-visibility safety vest, a requirement for contractors evaluating active commercial spaces. He looked every bit the elite professional he was. Despite how Patricia and Gavin constantly tried to diminish him, we exchanged a single imperceptible nod before he walked out to his truck. Our operation was a go. Downtown, the elite brokerage firm occupied the top 3 floors of a shimmering glass skyscraper. DeAndre walked through the revolving doors with total confidence. His temporary VIP security badge issued to him by the managing partner whose suite he was redesigning allowed him to bypass the standard guest log. He swiped through the primary turnstiles and rode the elevator up to the executive trading floor. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a blank text message from DeAndre. He was in. According to our intelligence gathering, Gavin always attended a mandatory firm-wide strategy meeting every Wednesday at exactly 10 in the morning. DeAndre timed his approach perfectly. He walked down the hushed carpeted hallway, unspooling a laser measuring tape to maintain his cover. The administrative assistants barely spared him a glance accustomed to his presence over the past month. He reached Gavin's corner office. The heavy glass door was unlocked. DeAndre slipped inside and pushed the door nearly shut, leaving just enough of a gap to hear approaching footsteps. He knelt beneath the massive mahogany desk and located the corporate terminal. His hands were steady as he retrieved the black USB drive I had given him. He plugged it into a hidden port at the back of the machine. The automated data extraction script launched instantly. Designed by top-tier cybersecurity experts, the software silently bypassed the firm's network firewalls and began copying the encrypted client ledgers, offshore routing numbers, and hidden trading logs Gavin thought were securely compartmentalized. DeAndre stood up and began measuring the dimensions of the corner windows, projecting the perfect image of a focused architect. A bead of sweat rolled down the back of his neck as the seconds ticked by. The extraction required exactly 4 minutes. If Gavin's meeting ended early, DeAndre would be caught alone in his office. 2 minutes passed. Then 3. DeAndre checked his phone screen, monitoring the hidden progress bar transmitted via Bluetooth. 95%, 99%. The drive chirped a tiny inaudible confirmation. Complete. DeAndre dropped to one knee, pulled the drive from the terminal, and slipped it deep into his suit pocket. He stood up and turned toward the door just as Gavin pushed it wide open. Gavin stopped, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of his brother-in-law standing in his private sanctuary. "What the hell are you doing in my office?" Gavin demanded, his voice dropping into a threatening register. DeAndre did not flinch. He held up his laser pointer and gestured to the ceiling. "The managing partner wants to match the crown molding in his new suite to the acoustic paneling in the corner offices," DeAndre said smoothly. "I needed a quick cross-reference." "I am done now." Gavin scoffed, stepping aside to let him pass. "Just make sure you do not track any dust onto the carpet. I have actual millionaire clients coming in this afternoon, and I do not want the place smelling like a construction site." DeAndre offered a tight, professional smile. "Understood, Gavin. Have a highly productive afternoon." DeAndre walked out of the skyscraper holding the digital weapon that would effectively end Gavin's life as a free man. We met 3 hours later at a noisy, crowded coffee shop miles away from our neighborhood. He slid the black USB drive across the table hidden beneath a folded napkin. I took it, feeling the immense weight of the data it contained. When I returned to my locked home office, I immediately plugged the drive into my secure auditing terminal. I spent the next 6 hours doing what I do best. I followed the money. The corporate data perfectly corroborated the initial fragments I had pulled from Gavin's home network. The complete picture was far more grotesque than I had imagined. Gavin had embezzled over $7 million from the generational wealth trusts of 4 elderly clients. He had funneled the cash through a labyrinth of shell companies stationed in the Cayman Islands, masking the theft with forged quarterly performance reports. Every single dollar had been subsequently incinerated on an illegal, highly leveraged margin account to fund his catastrophic trading addiction. The evidence was absolute. There were no missing links, no plausible deniability, and no way to blame a clerical error. I had the timestamps, the routing numbers, the forged digital signatures, and the internal memos where Gavin deliberately lied to his own compliance department. I opened a secure encrypted portal connected directly to the white-collar crime division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I attached a meticulously organized dossier indexing every violation of the United States Code, including wire fraud, securities fraud, and aggravated identity theft. I did not stop there. I immediately opened a secondary portal for the Internal Revenue Service. I filed Form 211, the official application for an award for original information, by reporting Gavin's massive tax evasion on his stolen unreported millions. I was legally ensuring that I would receive a significant percentage of whatever hidden assets the government managed to seize. I typed a brief clinical summary detailing my husband's criminal enterprise, emphasizing that he was an extreme flight risk who possessed active offshore accounts. I attached the clone drive contents as a secure compressed payload. I hovered my cursor over the submit button. My heart beat with a steady, powerful rhythm. For a brief moment, I thought about the man who had promised to protect me at the altar. I thought about the mother-in-law who had treated me like disposable trash. They believed they were the predators in this ecosystem. They believed I was simply a stepping stone for their ambition. I clicked submit. A green confirmation bar flashed across my screen. The federal government had received the data. The machinery of justice was now officially in motion, and it was a beast that Gavin could not manipulate, bribe, or sweet talk. The trap was locked and the countdown to their complete annihilation had begun. The very next morning, the atmosphere in the house shifted from a quiet invasion to a triumphant occupation. I walked downstairs to find Patricia standing in the center of the kitchen wearing a sweeping silk robe that dragged across the custom tile. She held a thick stack of heavy cream-colored envelopes and slapped them down onto the marble island right next to my coffee cup. "We are hosting a housewarming gala this Saturday," Patricia announced, not looking at me as she began opening cabinets to inspect my glassware. "I have already drafted the guest list. Gavin is inviting the senior partners from his brokerage, plus a select group of his highest net worth clients. I am inviting my entire social circle from the country club. It is time we properly introduce this estate to our community." I picked up one of the envelopes. The elegant gold foil lettering read, "You are cordially invited to celebrate the new residents of the Sterling family." They had not even bothered to include my name on the invitation for my own home. They were already erasing me from the narrative, firmly believing that the fraudulent property surrender deed was safely curing in the county clerk's office, preparing to officially strip me of my inheritance. Gavin strolled into the kitchen, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored shirt. He grabbed a green apple from the glass bowl and leaned heavily against the marble counter, radiating an almost intoxicating aura of smug satisfaction. "It is going to be the networking event of the season, Liv," he said, biting into the fruit. "My managing partner is bringing his wife. I need everything to be absolutely flawless. Mom is going to act as the primary hostess since she has a better eye for luxury events. You can help out behind the scenes." "Help out behind the scenes," Patricia scoffed, turning to face me with a sharp, mocking gaze. "Olivia is going to manage the entire domestic staff. In fact, Olivia, I need you to cancel whatever mundane spreadsheet meetings you have scheduled for the rest of the week. The crystal chandeliers in the dining room are dusty. The silver serving trays need to be hand-polished. I also need you to coordinate with the caterers, direct the valet service, and ensure the guest bathrooms are stocked with the imported soaps I ordered. You are going to be very busy." She was deliberately demoting me to the role of a domestic servant in front of my husband. She wanted to break my spirit to condition me for the absolute destitution they believed awaited me. They wanted me exhausted, subservient, and compliant. When Gavin finally dropped the divorce papers, I looked at the stack of envelopes. I looked at Gavin, who was grinning around his mouth full of apple, clearly enjoying my degradation. I felt a surge of cold clinical joy. They were gathering every single important person in their lives into one room. They were meticulously assembling the exact audience I needed to witness their total destruction. "I will handle all the preparations, Patricia," I said, keeping my voice soft and perfectly obedient. "You and Gavin, just focus on entertaining your guests. I will make sure this is a night nobody in your social circle will ever forget." I meant every single syllable of that promise. The fallout was going to be biblical. Patricia smiled, a cruel, satisfied curling of her lips. "See that you do, and please wear something subdued on Saturday. Black, preferably. The catering staff will be wearing black, and it will help you blend in when you are clearing the appetizer plates." Over the next 4 days, my own home became a psychological battlefield. Patricia followed me from room to room, pointing out invisible smudges on the baseboards and demanding I scrub the hardwood floors on my hands and knees. She forced me to polish 80 pieces of antique silver until my fingers were raw and blistered. She criticized the way I arranged the floral centerpieces, knocking them over intentionally so I would have to build them again from scratch. Every time she hurled an insult, every time she commanded me to fetch her a fresh glass of wine or fluff her pillows, I simply nodded and complied. I scrubbed the floors. I polished the silver. I carried her heavy boxes of useless Victorian decorations up the stairs. I played the role of the broken, defeated wife so perfectly that Gavin actually stopped paying attention to me entirely. He was too busy buying expensive new watches and booking luxury car rentals for the weekend to notice that his wife was operating with the terrifying calm of an executioner. They were completely blinded by their own arrogance. They thought their power was absolute. They had no idea that while Patricia was making me scrub the grout in the guest bathroom, I was receiving encrypted confirmation messages from my contact at the Internal Revenue Service. They had no idea that while Gavin was loudly bragging on the phone about his upcoming promotion, federal agents were silently securing subpoenas and freezing his offshore routing numbers. On Friday evening, the caterers arrived to begin setting up the massive outdoor dining tents. The estate was buzzing with frantic energy. Patricia strutted through the foyer, barking orders at the florists and threatening to fire the lighting technicians if the ambient glow was not warm enough. Gavin was standing on the back patio, smoking a cigar and surveying the property like a conquering king. I stood in the shadows of the upstairs hallway, looking down at the gold leaf table Patricia had placed in the entryway. I thought about my father. I thought about the sweat and love he poured into the wooden console she had thrown in the garbage. I thought about the sheer unadulterated evil required to steal a home from a grieving daughter and then force her to serve appetizers to the thieves. Patricia caught sight of me standing at the top of the stairs. She placed her hands on her hips, glaring up at me with absolute contempt. "What are you doing just standing there?" she snapped, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "The rental company just dropped off the crystal champagne flutes. They need to be washed, dried, and polished before tomorrow morning. Do I have to do everything myself? Get down to the kitchen and make yourself useful. You are lucky we even allow you to live in a place like this." I gripped the wooden banister. I did not glare back. I did not raise my voice. I simply gave her a polite hollow nod. "Right away, Patricia," I said calmly. "I will make sure the glasses are spotless." I walked down the stairs, passing right by her. I could smell the expensive perfume she had bought using money stolen from her own son's clients. I walked into the kitchen and began unpacking the crystal flutes, lining them up perfectly on the marble counter. I ran the hot water, letting the steam rise into the air. The delicate crystal required careful attention, the kind of focus I usually reserve for dissecting fraudulent ledgers. I welcomed the repetitive physical task. It kept my mind exceptionally sharp. Tomorrow night, this entire house would be filled with the wealthiest, most influential people in Chicago. Gavin's boss would be here. His biggest investors would be here. Patricia's entire country club network would be here. They were throwing a massive glittering party to celebrate a victory they had not actually won. My hands were completely steady as I dried the fragile glass, holding it up to the light to ensure there were no streaks. The trap was meticulously set. The federal agents had successfully locked onto their designated targets. The invisible ink on the fraudulent property deed had already completely vanished into thin air. I was entirely ready for the party. Saturday morning arrived with bright sunlight cutting through the high windows. I woke at 5, long before Gavin stirred in our massive king bed. I slipped from under the comforter, my mind calculating the precise sequence of events unfolding today. The house of cards would finally collapse. But first, I had to construct the perfect illusion of absolute submission. Downstairs, Patricia shattered the quiet morning, her heavy heels clicking against the marble floor. Wearing a crimson pantsuit and holding a clipboard like a commander, she shoved a laminated checklist against my chest. "The floral arrangements are asymmetrical," Patricia snapped harshly. "The caterers arrive in 1 hour. Supervise the valet setup. Do not let them park near the rose bushes. And tie your hair back. You look completely disheveled." I took the clipboard, projecting quiet obedience. "I will fix the flowers right now," I said evenly. "I will make sure the valet team directs the traffic properly." I spent 4 hours orchestrating the labor required to host an elite Chicago event. I directed crews carrying in high-top tables, supervised the installation of a marquee tent, and hand-polished the silver serving stations under Patricia's relentless gaze. Rachel emerged around noon, clutching an iced coffee and wearing sunglasses indoors. She pointed out a single smudge on the French doors and loudly demanded I fetch a cloth. I complied immediately. I wiped the glass, watching Rachel smirk at my degradation. Around 2, Gavin strutted into the kitchen. He smelled of expensive cologne, wearing a custom tuxedo that easily cost $5,000. He poured sparkling water and leaned against the counter, watching me arrange caviar appetizers onto silver platters. "You are doing a decent job here," Liv Gavin said with heavy patronizing approval. "Mom really knows how to whip things into shape. By the way, my accountant confirmed he received that stack of tax documents I dropped off. Everything is being processed with the county clerks and the federal systems today." He was testing me. He was probing to see if I had any lingering suspicions about the property surrender deed buried in that stack. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and gave him a bright, trusting smile. "Oh, good," I replied smoothly. "I am so glad we got that out of the way. I know how stressed you have been about financial compliance. Let me know if there is anything else you need me to sign next week." Gavin chuckled a low, arrogant sound of pure triumph. "I think we are completely covered," he said, adjusting his perfectly knotted bow tie. "You just focus on passing out the napkins tonight. I have to go greet my managing partner. He is arriving early for a private scotch tasting in the library." As Gavin walked away, I caught a glimpse of DeAndre carrying a crate of champagne flutes through the side door. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. DeAndre gave a single imperceptible nod. He had just checked the encrypted messaging app on his secure phone. The digital payload had reached its target. The federal warrants were officially signed. By 6 o'clock in the evening, the transformation of the estate was complete. Soft jazz drifted through the integrated sound system. A towering champagne pyramid gleamed under the custom lighting of the main hall. Waitstaff in crisp white uniforms circulated with trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres. Patricia cornered me in the hallway just before the first guests were scheduled to arrive. "Go upstairs and change," Patricia ordered, looking me up and down with intense distaste. "I bought a plain black dress for you. It is hanging on the back of your door. You are to blend in with the catering staff. I do not want Gavin's senior partners confused about who is actually running this household." I walked upstairs and found the dress. It was a cheap, shapeless black garment designed to erase any hint of status or authority. I slipped it on, smoothing the rough fabric over my hips. I pinned my hair back tightly, stripping away my jewelry, leaving only my wedding band. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see a victim. I saw a ghost. I saw a woman who had completely vanished from the narrative her abusers had written. It was the perfect camouflage for an executioner. I returned to the ground floor just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The grand iron gates of the driveway swung open and the elite society of Chicago began to pour into the estate. Gleaming black luxury sedans, silver sports cars, and massive armored SUVs crawled up the paving stones. The valet attendants scrambled to open doors, welcoming wealthy investment bankers, corporate executives, and country club socialites. I stood in the shadows near the grand staircase holding a silver tray of empty crystal glasses. The tension in the air was electric, a thick, palpable hum of wealth and arrogance. Patricia greeted the arriving guests with loud theatrical kisses, boasting about the architectural details of the home as if she had laid the bricks herself. Gavin stood near the grand fireplace, shaking hands with older men in expensive suits, laughing loudly, playing the role of the master of the universe. The house swelled with over 100 people. The volume of conversations grew to a deafening roar. Diamonds flashed under the chandeliers. Expensive champagne flowed like water. I moved silently through the crowd, collecting discarded napkins and empty glasses, entirely invisible to the millionaires surrounding me. Every so often, I glanced out the massive bay windows toward the street beyond the gated entrance. The neighborhood was quiet, completely dark, except for the street lights. But I knew what was out there. I knew that parked out of sight, waiting for the precise operational trigger, was a fleet of unmarked black vehicles. The guests inside were drinking to my husband's success, completely unaware that the ground beneath their designer shoes was about to crack wide open. I carried an empty silver tray through the throngs of laughing elites moving like a phantom in my shapeless black dress. The air inside the grand hall grew thick with the scent of expensive cologne and roasted duck. Gavin held court near the grand piano surrounded by senior partners from his brokerage firm. I kept my head bowed smoothly, wiping down a side table just inches from where they stood. I needed to hear every word of his final performance. "It is all about aggressive diversification," Gavin told a gray-haired executive swirling the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler. "You have to anticipate the market shifts before the algorithms do. That is how I secured this estate. We closed the deal quickly, quietly, and entirely on my terms. When you know how to leverage your assets, gentlemen, real estate like this is just a drop in the bucket. The executives nodded in profound respect, completely oblivious to the fact that their own clients' stolen funds had financed the very champagne they were currently swallowing. They were praising a man who had secretly gutted their firm's credibility. Gavin soaked up their admiration, his chest puffed out with undeniable arrogance. He genuinely believed he had conquered the financial world. He believed he was untouchable. Across the room, Patricia was equally intoxicated by her own fabricated reality. She stood near the curved staircase, her crimson pantsuit standing out against the neutral tones of the foyer. She was speaking loudly to a group of women draped in diamonds, deliberately projecting her voice so her words would echo across the marble floors. I simply had to step in and purchase the property. Patricia sighed, placing a manicured hand over her heart to feed maternal exhaustion. My son works incredibly hard, but unfortunately his wife lacks the fundamental capacity to manage a household budget. She nearly drove them into foreclosure with her reckless spending. I bought the estate outright to protect my boy. It is a mother's duty to provide stability when a spouse fails so miserably. The women murmured their sympathetic approval, casting quick, disdainful glances in my direction. They saw exactly what Patricia wanted them to see. A pathetic, incompetent woman who had to be bailed out by her wealthy mother-in-law. I offered them a polite, empty smile and collected their discarded cocktail napkins. I felt no anger toward their judgment. Their opinions were utterly irrelevant. They were nothing more than temporary props in a much larger stage production. I caught sight of DeAndre standing near the entrance to the kitchen. He was dressed in a sharp charcoal suit holding a glass of sparkling water. Unlike the other guests who were heavily drinking and laughing, DeAndre remained intensely focused. His dark eyes scanned the room with calculating precision. Rachel was nowhere near him, likely off gossiping with her mother's friends. DeAndre and I exchanged a fleeting look. He subtly tapped 2 fingers against the side of his glass. The operation was advancing exactly on schedule. The federal agents had established their perimeter. I moved away from the crowd, carrying my tray toward the massive front windows of the living room. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn back to display the sprawling manicured front lawn and the wrought iron gates at the end of the long driveway. The interior of the house was blazing with light and noise, creating a perfect reflection on the glass. But if you pressed close enough to the pane, you could see the dark street beyond the property line. I stopped behind a tall potted palm blending entirely into the shadows and looked out into the freezing Chicago night. The street lights cast long, sharp shadows across the pavement. At first, the road appeared completely empty. Then, a massive black sport utility vehicle rolled silently past the wrought iron gates. It did not have its headlights on. It glided through the darkness like a shark, patrolling deep water and parked flush against the curb, completely blocking the eastern exit of my street. A minute later, a second black vehicle appeared from the opposite direction. It executed a sharp synchronized turn and parked diagonally across the western exit. The street was now completely sealed. No vehicles could enter, and more importantly, no vehicles could leave. My pulse quickened with a cold, terrifying thrill. I watched as a third and fourth vehicle pulled up silently directly across from my front gates. The doors of the lead vehicle opened. In the dim amber glow of the street lights, I could clearly see the silhouettes of men and women stepping onto the pavement. They were wearing heavy tactical vests. Even from this distance, the large yellow letters printed across their backs were unmistakable. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had arrived. The Internal Revenue Service Enforcement Division was right beside them. They did not rush the gates immediately. They moved with frightening organized precision. I watched them set up a tactical perimeter, communicating through discreet earpieces, confirming that all escape routes were heavily secured. They were treating my home exactly like the stronghold of a major corporate criminal. Gavin had wanted to play in the big leagues of financial manipulation, and now the big leagues had finally come to collect their dues. Inside the grand hall, the music swelled to a vibrant crescendo. The clinking of glasses and the roar of arrogant laughter completely drowned out the silence of the tactical operation assembling outside. Patricia clapped her hands together, demanding the attention of the catering manager. She ordered them to prepare the main dining room for the grand toast. "Everyone, please," Patricia called out, her voice cutting through the noise. "Gather around the grand staircase. My son has a very special announcement to make regarding the future of this beautiful estate." The crowd began to shift, moving away from the windows and crowding into the center of the foyer. The elite guests murmured with anticipation, eager to witness the climax of the evening. Gavin stepped up onto the first landing of the marble staircase, looking down at his audience with absolute superiority. He held a fresh glass of champagne in his right hand. I knew exactly what he was holding in his left hand, concealed inside the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket. The divorce papers, the eviction notice, the final brutal strike he had meticulously planned to destroy my life in front of his peers. I placed my silver tray down on a side table. I smoothed the rough fabric of my cheap black dress and walked slowly toward the back of the crowd. I wanted a perfect view. I wanted to see every single micro-expression on his face when his manufactured reality collided violently with the federal consequences he had earned. Gavin raised his glass high into the air. The room fell into an expectant, glittering silence. The trap was fully loaded. The trigger was set. I stood in the dark, watching the man who had stolen my father's money take a deep breath to deliver his final lie. Outside, heavy boots began marching up my driveway. Gavin tapped a silver spoon against the rim of his crystal champagne flute. The sharp ringing sound sliced through the quiet anticipation in the grand foyer. He offered a charming chuckle as hundreds of elite guests directed their full attention to him. He looked like the perfect corporate prince standing on the marble steps of a mansion he had not paid for, preparing to ruin a woman he had never truly loved. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," Gavin began, his voice projecting effortlessly across the vast space. "When I look around this room, I see mentors, colleagues, and dear friends who have supported my journey in the financial sector. Building wealth is about vision, discipline, and recognizing when a fundamental restructuring is absolutely necessary to preserve the core asset." The managing partners from his brokerage nodded in solemn agreement, treating his arrogant metaphor as profound business wisdom. Patricia stood a few steps below him, glowing with maternal pride, her hands clasped elegantly in front of her crimson suit. "As many of you know, managing risk is the foundation of my career." Gavin continued, his tone shifting into something heavier and manufactured with false regret. "Sometimes the greatest risks we face are not in the global markets, but inside our own homes." A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. Eyes began to shift, scanning the room to find me standing in my shapeless black dress near the back wall. I did not shrink away. I stepped forward slightly, allowing the ambient light of the chandelier to illuminate my face. I wanted them all to see me perfectly clearly. "Marriage is a partnership built on trust," Gavin said, looking directly at me with a gaze devoid of any human warmth. "But trust requires competence. Unfortunately, over the past year, Olivia has demonstrated a catastrophic inability to manage our household finances. Her reckless spending habits and staggering financial incompetence nearly drove this beautiful estate into foreclosure before the paint was even dry." I heard a sharp gasp from an older socialite standing near the front. The room grew uncomfortably still. Airing marital grievances at a high society gala was a massive breach of etiquette, but Gavin and Patricia had calculated this move specifically to destroy my reputation so thoroughly that no one would ever question my sudden departure. "Thankfully," Gavin announced, gesturing broadly to his mother, "my mother stepped in to prevent a total disaster. Through her immense generosity and sharp business acumen, Patricia has officially purchased this entire estate. She saved me from financial ruin, and for that I owe her everything. Let us raise a glass to the new permanent owner of this magnificent home." The guests hesitantly raised their glasses. A scattering of polite applause echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Patricia beamed, bowing her head in mock humility. She was drinking in the adulation, entirely convinced her fraudulent scheme had succeeded. "But the restructuring does not end with real estate," Gavin said. He handed his champagne glass to Patricia and reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored tuxedo jacket. He pulled out a thick leg-sized manila envelope. The room fell into absolute silence. You could hear the ice shifting in glasses. Olivia stepped forward. Gavin commanded. His voice held no warmth, only the cold authority of an executioner dismissing a condemned prisoner. I walked slowly through the parted crowd. The wealthy guests stepped back, physically, distancing themselves from me as if financial failure was a contagious disease. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my shoulders back, my chin level. I did not tremble. I reached the base of the staircase and looked up at my husband. Gavin looked down at me, holding out the heavy envelope. Inside this envelope are formal divorce proceedings. He declared, his voice ringing loud enough for the people in the back rows to hear every single syllable. There is also a legally binding 30-day eviction notice. Because this property now belongs entirely to Patricia and her holding company, you have absolutely no legal right to remain on the premises. I expect you to gather your personal belongings and vacate the guest room by the end of the month. I reached out and took the envelope from his hand. It felt heavy, loaded with his arrogance and his profound delusion. Patricia stepped down to stand right beside me. She leaned in close, ensuring the guests in the front row could hear her viciously calculated words. This is my house now, Olivia. Patricia stated, her eyes flashing with pure malice. We gave you every opportunity to be part of an elite family, and you proved yourself entirely inadequate. Do not make a hysterical scene. Do not embarrass yourself any further. Have some basic dignity. Pack your cheap clothes and walk out of our lives quietly. The guests murmured among themselves. I saw expressions of disgust, pity, and outright shock on the faces of the millionaires surrounding us. Rachel stood near the dining room entrance, openly smirking at my public humiliation. DeAndre remained frozen near the kitchen, his dark eyes locked intensely onto mine, waiting for the signal. Gavin crossed his arms over his chest. He looked around the room, expecting his colleagues to validate his ruthless efficiency. He believed he had just successfully amputated a failing appendage and cemented his legacy as a brilliant unencumbered broker. He had stripped me of my dignity, my home, and my marriage in less than 3 minutes. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, clutching the manila envelope. I looked at the divorce papers. I looked at the eviction notice. Then I slowly lifted my gaze to meet my husband and his terrible eyes. I did not shed a single tear. I did not scream. I did not collapse under the crushing weight of their orchestrated humiliation. Instead, I reached into the hidden pocket of my black dress and pulled out a wireless microphone I had taken from the catering crew earlier this very afternoon. I clicked the small switch on the side of the microphone. A sharp, piercing whine of audio feedback echoed through the vaulted ceilings, causing several guests in the front row to wheeze and cover their ears. The sound abruptly cut off the lingering whispers in the grand foyer. I had their absolute undivided attention. I looked up at my husband, whose smug smile was rapidly faltering. Gavin, I said, my voice amplified and echoing with terrifying clarity across the marble floors. I want to thank you for that incredibly illuminating speech. You spoke beautifully about risk management and preserving core assets. It is a fascinating perspective coming from a man who understands absolutely nothing about either concept. Gavin gripped the wooden banister, his knuckles turning white. Olivia, turn that microphone off right now. You are making a fool of yourself. I ignored him completely, turning my gaze to the sea of wealthy executives and high society figures. My husband forgot to mention a minor detail in his glowing self-evaluation. I continued pacing slowly across the base of the staircase. For the past 8 years, I have been a senior financial auditor and risk manager for one of the top corporate firms in this city. My entire professional existence is dedicated to uncovering frauding hidden assets and destroying people who think they are smart enough to steal in the dark. Patricia stepped down another stair, her face twisting with panic and rage. Security, she yelled, waving her hands toward the catering staff. Get this woman out of my house immediately. She is trespassing. I held up my free hand, silencing her outburst. That brings me to my next point, Patricia. You keep calling this your house. You stood up there and told these people, you saved us from foreclosure by purchasing this estate outright. I looked down at the heavy manila envelope in my hand. I pulled out the 30-day eviction notice and the divorce papers, holding them up for the crowd to see. You are evicting me from a property you believe you acquired through a document I signed 2 nights ago, Gavin sneered, regaining a fraction of his arrogant posture. You signed the paperwork, Liv. I watched you do it. The deed is transferred. You surrendered your equity. It is over. I reached into the pocket of my dress and retrieved the heavy metallic blue pen. I held it up between my fingers, letting the chandelier light catch its polished surface. I signed the paperwork with this exact pen. Gavin, do you remember how eager you were? How you rushed into my office, shoved a stack of tax documents in my face, and buried page 47 in the middle, hoping I was too exhausted to notice a property surrender agreement. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Senior partners from Gavin's brokerage began exchanging alarmed glances. The word fraud rippled through the audience. I am an auditor, Gavin, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper that resonated through the speakers. I read every single line of every single document that passes across my desk. I knew exactly what you were trying to do, but I also knew that if I refused to sign it, you would simply find another way to forge the transfer. So I gave you exactly what you wanted, a beautiful, flawless signature. I turned to face Patricia, who was gripping her own throat, her chest heaving rapidly. Tell them, Patricia, I commanded. Tell your elite country club friends exactly what happened when you proudly marched into the county clerk office this morning to officially file that deed. Patricia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. Since she seems to have lost her voice, I will explain it to the room, I announced. This pen is a specialized forensic tool utilized in high financial sting operations. The chemical composition of the ink is highly reactive to ambient air. Within exactly 24 hours of application, the chemical bonds completely break down and evaporate. When Patricia handed that legally binding document to the county clerk this morning, she handed them a completely blank piece of paper. A collective gasp erupted from the crowd. Someone dropped a crystal champagne flute and it shattered against the marble floor. Gavin stared at me, his face draining of all color. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the click. You are lying, he stammered, his voice cracking. That is impossible. Call your lawyer, Gavin. I challenged him. Call the clerk. Ask them why the transfer was officially rejected at 10 this morning. There is no company ownership. There is no property transfer. You tried to steal a $1.8 million estate using a cheap trick, and you failed spectacularly. I took a step closer to the stairs, forcing them both to look down into my eyes. When we purchased this home, I liquidated my late father's inheritance to pay for 70% of the total cost. I let you put your name on the deed because I believed in our marriage. But the moment you attempted to defraud me, I filed an emergency injunction with my legal team. Because you engaged in documented attempted wire fraud to steal my core asset, a federal judge granted a temporary freeze on your equity share. This afternoon, I dropped the manila envelope onto the floor, letting the divorce and eviction papers scatter across the marble. This house does not belong to Patricia. It never belonged to Patricia. And as of today, it no longer belongs to you. This estate is 100% mine. The absolute silence that followed was deafening. The wealthy elite of Chicago stood paralyzed, witnessing the brutal public execution of an investment broker's personal life. Gavin opened his mouth to speak, but his throat seized. He was completely out of his depth, facing a reality he could not manipulate or charm his way out of. Patricia let out a high-pitched shriek of pure unfiltered rage. You little thief! She screamed, lunging forward on the stairs. You set us up. You planned this to ruin us. I did not flinch as she screamed. I stood my ground, looking at the two monsters who had tried to leave me with nothing. I did not ruin you, Patricia, I replied, my voice cold and unwavering. I merely handed you the shovel, And you chose to dig your own grave, but the property deed was only the beginning. The house was just the appetizer. I turned my gaze back to Gavin, watching the sweat begin to pull at his temples. I raised the microphone again, ready to drop the final catastrophic weight that would crush them both into dust. You thought you were a genius, Gavin, I said. You thought you could treat my life like a bad investment and simply write off the losses. But you forgot one crucial detail. When you invite an auditor into your home, you better make sure your ledgers are clean. And Gavin, your ledgers are stained with the worst kind of filth. I turned to face the crowd, specifically locking eyes with his managing partner. The real show is just beginning. I reached into my pocket and retrieved my personal cell phone. My thumb hovered over the specialized secure application I had configured exactly for this precise moment. Gavin tracked my movement, his eyes darting frantically from the phone in my hand to the massive 85-inch flat-screen television mounted directly above the grand marble fireplace. The screen had been displaying a looping slideshow of elegant architectural photos meant to impress his corporate guests. I tapped the screen of my phone, overriding the display network with a single keystroke. The cheerful jazz music playing through the integrated surround sound system cut off abruptly. The sudden silence in the grand hall was absolute and heavy. Every head in the room turned toward the enormous television as the screen flickered to pitch black. A second later, crisp, high-definition infrared footage flooded the display. The timestamp in the bottom corner glowed bright white, marking the time as 2 a.m. The location was unmistakably my private library. Gavin let out a guttural sound of pure panic. He lunged down the remaining marble stairs, shoving past his own mother in a desperate bid to reach the media console. But he was too late, and the network was entirely encrypted. He could not stop what was already in motion. The surround sound speakers crackled to life, broadcasting hushed, urgent whispers at maximum volume. The entire room of Chicago elites watched in stunned silence as the black and white versions of Gavin and Patricia crept into the frame. The massive screen showcased Gavin holding a bypass key, expertly picking the lock on my personal biometric safe. Hurry up, grab the inheritance tax documents and her life insurance policy. Patricia hissed through the speakers, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. We need the exact policy numbers. A collective wave of revulsion swept through the crowd. Women covered their mouths in shock. The managing partner from Gavin's brokerage firm took a slow, deliberate step backward, his face hardening into a mask of pure professional disgust. He was watching his star employee commit a felony on a cinema-quality display. On the screen, Gavin pulled out a stack of documents. His face was illuminated by the harsh flash of his phone camera as he rapidly photographed my financial files. I have them, the digital, Gavin whispered. Are you sure the lawyer can draft the transfer in time? The digital, Patricia replied, snatching the papers with vicious greed. I have already set up the holding company. We will get her to sign the property surrender deed by burying it in your quarterly tax filings. By the time you hand her the divorce papers next month, the house will belong entirely to my company. She will walk out of here with exactly what she brought into this family, which is nothing. The audio feed was flawless, capturing every ounce of their malice. The real Patricia stood frozen on the staircase, her face completely devoid of blood. The high society friends she had spent all evening trying to impress were staring at her with unabashed horror. The polished, wealthy matriarch persona she had carefully cultivated for decades shattered into a million irreparable pieces in front of her country club peers. She was exposed not as a generous mother saving her son, but as a common thief orchestrating a conspiracy to rob a sleeping woman. Gavin frantically slammed his hands against the media console, ripping cables from the wall in a frantic bid to kill the power. Sparks flew from the outlet, but the television was wired to a secondary emergency power source I had specifically requested during the security installation. The broadcast continued relentlessly. Turn it off. Gavin screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. His perfectly tailored tuxedo felt absurd, now a clown suit on a desperate criminal. He turned to the crowd waving his hands wildly. This is manipulated footage. She altered the audio. It is a deep fake engineered to ruin me. No one believed him. The clarity of the video, the exact layout of the library, the undeniable specific details of the tax filings they had just discussed earlier tonight made the truth absolute. I stepped forward, keeping my posture rigid and commanding. I did not manipulate anything, Gavin. I stated, my voice projecting clearly over the murmurs of the horrified crowd. I simply installed a security system in my own home to protect my assets from the people living inside it. I watched you break into my safe while I was sedated with cold medicine you handed me. I watched you plan to steal my inheritance. I let you think you had succeeded so you would gather every single person whose respect you crave into this room to witness your true character. Rachel, Gavin's sister, pushed her way to the front of the crowd, her designer sunglasses forgotten in her hand. She stared at the television screen and then at her mother, a look of profound betrayal crossing her features. Even Rachel, who had happily mocked me all week, realized the sheer magnitude of the criminality displayed before her. The managing partner from the brokerage firm finally broke his silence. His voice was low, growly, and carried the weight of impending corporate doom. Gavin, he said, stepping forward from the sea of guests. You used an illegal bypass key to open a secure safe. You forged property transfer documents. You engaged in a conspiracy to commit wire fraud. If you were willing to orchestrate this level of complex deception against your own wife in your own home, I have to ask myself a very dangerous question. The executive paused, letting his gaze bore holes into Gavin's sweating, panicked face. What exactly have you been doing with my client's money? Gavin visibly trembled. The color drained from his lips, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. Sir, he stammered, taking a step toward his boss, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. My personal marital issues have absolutely nothing to do with my professional conduct. You know my record. You know my portfolios yield incredible returns. I run a tight ship. You run a pirate ship, Gavin, I corrected loudly, cutting off his pathetic defense. I tapped my phone screen again, shifting the visual on the television. The black and white surveillance footage vanished, replaced by a crisp, high-contrast spreadsheet. The columns were filled with routing numbers, client names, and massive deficit figures highlighted in bright neon red. The managing partner squinted at the screen, adjusting his glasses. His eyes widened as he recognized the account headers. Those were the highly confidential generational wealth trusts managed exclusively by Gavin. I turned to face the executive. Sir, I am a senior auditor. When I discovered my husband was trying to steal my house, I read a forensic sweep of his network traffic. I did not just find evidence of his plot against me. I found the shadow ledgers. I found the hidden offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Gavin lunged toward me, his face contorted in absolute feral rage. Shut your mouth, he roared, closing the distance between us. Before he could take another step, DeAndre moved from the kitchen entrance with blinding speed. He stepped smoothly between me and Gavin, planting his feet firmly on the marble floor. DeAndre shoved Gavin backward with a solid flat palm to his chest, sending the broker stumbling into the gold leaf table Patricia had placed in the foyer. The hideous replica table tipped over, crashing onto the floor and splintering into useless pieces. Do not take another step toward her, Gavin. DeAndre warned, his voice, a low, dangerous rumble that echoed with the righteous anger of a man who had his own life savings stolen. Your game is entirely over. You are done bullying people. Gavin stared at DeAndre, breathing heavily, looking like a cornered animal, realizing every escape route was sealed. He looked at the massive screen displaying his embezzlement. He looked at his mother, who was silently weeping on the stairs, stripped of her dignity. He looked at his boss, who was already pulling out a cell phone to call the firm's legal compliance team. I stood behind DeAndre, completely untouched and entirely victorious. I raised the microphone to my lips one last time to deliver the final killing blow. I held the microphone close, my voice slicing through the heavy, terrified silence of the grand foyer. You incinerated over $7 million of client funds, Gavin. You gambled away generational wealth. You stole your own brother-in-law's home equity, and you forged quarterly statements to cover your tracks. Every piece of evidence has been carefully compiled and authenticated. I sent the cloned drives to the authorities yesterday. The audit is officially closed." Gavin completely snapped. He let out a primal scream of absolute fury, grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the mantel, and swung it wildly at the massive television screen. He swung the heavy base like a club, believing it would erase the digital evidence. The glass spider webbed with a sickening crunch, distorting the spreadsheet into jagged shards of light. Before he could swing the brass holder a second time, a sound like thunder erupted from the front of the estate. The massive custom oak double doors of my home did not just open. They were violently breached. A heavy steel battering ram smashed through the reinforced locking mechanism with explosive force. The doors flew inward, slamming against the foyer walls so hard the plaster cracked. Federal agents flooded into the grand entryway in a synchronized wave of dark tactical gear. The sheer physical presence of the strike team instantly sucked the air out of the room. They wore heavy Kevlar vests emblazoned with stark yellow letters. FBI on the front line, followed immediately by agents from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Federal agents, a commanding voice roared over the chaos. "Nobody move. Keep your hands visible and step away from the exits." The glittering high society gala evaporated, replaced by the terrifying reality of a federal crime scene. Elite executives and wealthy socialites completely panicked. Women in designer gowns screamed and dropped their crystal glasses, the fragile flutes shattering across expensive Persian rugs. Men in custom tuxedos raised their hands, pressing their backs flat against the walls, desperate to distance themselves from the targets. The lead FBI agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a completely uncompromising expression, strode directly to the center of the foyer. He bypassed the terrified guests without a single glance. His eyes locked entirely onto my husband. Gavin stood frozen beneath the ruined television. The candlestick slipped from his fingers, hitting the marble with a hollow thud. His chest heaved as he stared at the agents. His arrogant corporate bravado had entirely vanished, replaced by the terror of a cornered child. "Gavin, the lead agent," announced, his voice booming with legal authority. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest. Step away from the console and place your hands behind your back." Gavin just did not move. He was completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his sudden destruction. He opened his mouth, but only a ragged, hyperventilating gasp escaped. "Do it now," the agent commanded, stepping forward with handcuffs. Two agents flanked him, grabbed Gavin by the shoulders, spun him around, and slammed him chest first against a marble column. The cold steel snapped shut around his wrists with a sharp click. Across the foyer, Patricia finally snapped out of her paralyzed shock. Her maternal entitlement flared up in a spectacular, delusional display of arrogance. She marched down the remaining stairs, her face flushed red with indignation, waving her manicured finger at the heavily armed federal agents. "What do you think you are doing?" Patricia shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly over the commotion. "Take your hands off my son immediately. Do you have any idea who we are? We are highly respected members of this community. You are ruining my housewarming party. I demand to speak to your superior right this instant." A stern female agent from the IRS division stepped directly into Patricia's path. She did not look intimidated by the crimson pantsuit or the expensive pearls. Patricia, the agent, stated flatly, pulling a folded document from her tactical vest. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest as well." Patricia stopped dead in her tracks, her jaw dropped, her eyes bulging with sheer disbelief. "Arrest me?" she gasped, looking around at her horrified friends for support. "For what? I have done absolutely nothing wrong. You are being charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, aggravated forgery, and aiding and abetting corporate embezzlement," the IRS agent recited, reading from the warrant. "Turn around and give me your hands." Patricia let out a hysterical wail. She tried to pull away, but the agent was faster. The agent grabbed Patricia's wrists and secured the handcuffs. Patricia struggled, shredding whatever dignity she had left. A dedicated team of cyber forensic agents marched straight up the sweeping staircase. I knew exactly where they were going. I had provided the precise blueprints. They were heading for Gavin's home office to seize his physical ledgers and secure the desktop terminal DeAndre had successfully breached. The managing partner of the brokerage firm stepped away from the wall. He smoothed his expensive suit jacket, his face a mask of ruthless self-preservation. He approached the lead FBI agent entirely ready to throw Gavin into the fire to save his own firm. "Officer," the managing partner said, his voice dripping with professional detachment. "I am the senior director of his brokerage. We had absolutely no knowledge of these unauthorized activities. We will fully cooperate with your investigation and provide immediate access to all corporate servers. We want him prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." Gavin heard his boss abandon him. He twisted his neck, looking back over his shoulder. His eyes were wide, bloodshot and filled with absolute despair. He looked past the federal agents. He looked past his crying mother. He looked directly at me. I stood perfectly still in my cheap black dress, watching the magnificent, chaotic operation unfold. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply offered him the cold, unyielding stare of an auditor who had successfully balanced the ledger. The federal agents did not give Gavin a second to process his downfall. Two men propelled him forward with brutal efficiency. They marched him out of the foyer and shoved him straight into the massive designer kitchen. Gavin stumbled over his expensive shoes. An agent pressed a hand between his shoulder blades and forced him face down against the cold marble of the kitchen island, the very same island where he had stood just hours ago, mocking my domestic servitude. His cheek squashed flat against the polished stone, distorting his desperate, frantic pleas. "Listen to me," Gavin gasped, his breath fogging the marble surface. "I can make a deal. I have assets. I know people in the commissions. You do not understand how the market works. I was going to pay it all back. I just needed one more quarter to balance the margins." The lead federal agent did not even bother to reply. He patted Gavin down, retrieving his platinum cell phone and sliding it into an evidence bag. He recited the Miranda rights in a flat tone that completely stripped Gavin of his corporate identity. He was no longer a master of the universe. He was simply a federal suspect caught dead to rights. Back in the foyer, Patricia was fighting a losing battle against the female agent from the Internal Revenue Service. Patricia thrashed wildly, her crimson pantsuit twisting out of place, her carefully pinned hair falling into her eyes. She looked utterly deranged. "You cannot do this to me," Patricia screamed, her voice cracking into a shrill pitch. "Do you know who I am? I am a platinum member of the country club. I demand my phone. I am calling my lawyers. I will have your badges for this outrage. I am a victim here. My son handles my finances. I know nothing about any fraud." She threw her own son under the bus the exact second her freedom was threatened. The maternal loyalty she had loudly proclaimed to her wealthy friends evaporated instantly. She kicked her heel toward the agent. A pathetic attempt to resist arrest. The agent simply shifted her weight, hooked the arm of Patricia, and marched her forcefully toward the shattered front doors. The elite guests who had packed the house earlier watched the humiliating exit of Patricia with absolute disgust. These were people who built their entire lives around maintaining perfect public images. Watching the family matriarch being hauled away in handcuffs while screaming like a common criminal was a social contagion they desperately needed to avoid. The exodus began immediately. The managing partner of the brokerage firm was the first to leave. He marched out without looking back, dialing his crisis management team to isolate his company from the radioactive crimes of Gavin. The wealthy socialites who scoffed at my black dress fled the room like rats abandoning a sinking ship. They scrambled toward the coat check, ignoring all social graces as they pushed past each other to escape the flashing red and blue lights illuminating the driveway. Nobody stopped to offer Patricia a word of comfort. Nobody stepped forward to defend Gavin. The loyalty of the ultra-wealthy extends only as far as your utility to them. The moment Gavin and Patricia became federal liabilities, they were completely erased from high society. I stood in the center of the rapidly emptying hall, watching the mass evacuation. The valet attendants outside were completely overwhelmed by the frantic demands of fleeing millionaires. Engines roared to life. Tires squealed against the pavement as luxury vehicles sped away from the estate, desperate to avoid any association with the federal raid. The towering champagne pyramid remained completely untouched. The extravagant floral arrangements looked ridiculous amidst the chaos. The housewarming gala had transformed into a spectacular funeral for their reputations. An older agent approached me with a clipboard, his demeanor respectful and cautious. "Madam, we must firmly secure the premises and conduct a sweep of the personal office of the suspect. We have everything we need from your digital submission, but protocol requires a physical evidence chain." I nodded smoothly. "The office is at the top of the stairs, the last door on the right. I have already disabled the smart locks for your team. You will find his physical ledgers inside a biometric safe behind the desk." The agent thanked me and signaled his team to move upstairs. I turned my attention back to the front doors. Patricia was currently being shoved into the back of an armored federal vehicle. She kept screaming my name, hurling vicious insults into the freezing Chicago night, blaming me for her greed and her hubris. The heavy steel door of the vehicle slammed shut, cutting off her toxic voice permanently. In the kitchen, the federal agents hauled Gavin upright. His bespoke tuxedo was wrinkled and stained with sweat. His face was a portrait of total devastation. As they marched him out toward the front entrance, our eyes met one final time. He looked at me, searching for a single ounce of the submissive, accommodating wife he thought he had broken. He found nothing but a void. I did not blink. I did not turn away. I watched him being paraded out of my house in handcuffs his entire life, completely obliterated by the very auditor he had mocked. The grand foyer slowly emptied of heavily armed federal agents, leaving only the scattered remnants of a ruined party. The heavy silence returned, broken only by the sound of police radios outside. I looked quietly across the massive room. Rachel stood alone near the dining room entrance, shivering in her designer dress. Her mother was gone. Her brother was gone. The immense family wealth she had always hidden behind had just been seized by the federal government. She clutched her expensive purse, her eyes darting frantically around the room, slowly realizing that she was the only one left standing on the sinking ship, and DeAndre was walking directly toward her. Rachel frantically wiped her smudged mascara, her breathing erratic and shallow. As DeAndre approached, she lunged forward, grabbing the lapels of his charcoal suit with trembling hands. She desperately needed him to anchor her crumbling reality. "DeAndre, do something," Rachel pleaded, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Call a lawyer. Call the police. Olivia just framed my brother and my mother. We have to get them out. This is a massive misunderstanding. Gavin would never steal anything. Mom was just trying to protect our family assets." DeAndre did not raise his arms to hold her. He stood perfectly rigid, letting her clutch his jacket. He looked down at his wife, his face completely devoid of the warmth and patience he had offered her for years. "They are not coming back, Rachel," DeAndre said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "There is no misunderstanding. Gavin embezzled millions of dollars from his clients. Your mother conspired to commit federal wire fraud to steal this house. They are guilty and they are going to federal prison." Rachel stepped back as if physically struck. She looked wildly around the ruined foyer, then glared at me, standing quietly by the staircase. "You did this," Rachel screamed, pointing an accusing finger in my direction. "You set them up because you were jealous. You are a vindictive crazy woman. DeAndre, do not just stand there. Defend my family. Defend your wife." DeAndre slowly reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. He did not pull out a phone to call for help. He pulled out a crisp white envelope and held it out toward her. "I am defending my family," DeAndre stated, his dark eyes locking onto hers with absolute unyielding intensity. "But you are no longer part of it. Rachel stared at the envelope, her anger momentarily derailed by profound confusion. "What is that?" she stammered, crossing her arms defensively. "Those are divorce papers," DeAndre replied, his voice echoing cleanly in the empty hall. "I filed them this afternoon while you were busy getting your nails done for this party. I already moved the remainder of my personal belongings out of the guest house. I am leaving you, Rachel, right now." Rachel let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh, a fragile, ugly sound that betrayed her complete panic. "You cannot leave me. We are married. We are a team. You have nothing without my family. We put a roof over your head." DeAndre stepped closer, invading her space, forcing her to look directly at the consequences of her cruelty. "You did not put a roof over my head," he corrected her, his tone dropping to a lethal whisper. "I built a historic home with my own two hands. I worked 80-hour weeks to secure our future. Your mother manipulated me into selling it, and your brother stole my $150,000 of equity to fund his illegal gambling addiction." Rachel swallowed hard, her eyes darting away. "I did not know about that," she lied, her voice shrinking. "Gavin said the market dipped. It was a bad investment. I had no idea he took your money." DeAndre did not blink. "You did," he countered smoothly. "Olivia pulled the digital communication logs from your brother's server. I read the text messages you sent to Gavin 3 months ago. You told him to keep me quiet. You told him I was financially illiterate and that I should just be grateful to be associated with the prestigious Sterling family. You knew he stole my life savings and you mocked me for asking questions." Rachel shrank back, the last traces of her arrogant bravado evaporating. The lie was exposed. She had completely underestimated the quiet, intelligent man she married. "I am taking everything back," DeAndre continued, refusing to give her a single second to recover. "Before the federal agents froze your brother's accounts tonight, Olivia and I executed a legally binding recovery transfer. My $150,000 was flagged as stolen property and securely diverted into a heavily protected escrow account under my name. The government has already approved the restitution. I got my money back, Rachel. But you get absolutely nothing." "What do you mean nothing?" Rachel gasped, her hands shaking violently. "I am entitled to half of those funds. We are legally married." "Not anymore?" DeAndre said, his lips curling into a cold, satisfied smile. "You signed several of Gavin's fraudulent corporate loans last year to secure your elite country club membership. You allowed Patricia to use your social security number to open offshore shell companies. Because you willfully tied your identity to their financial crimes, every single asset you currently possess is being seized by the Internal Revenue Service. Your bank accounts are entirely frozen. Your credit cards or your designer car will be repossessed by tomorrow morning." Rachel looked down at her expensive dress and the designer handbag clutched in her hands. She was breathing rapidly. The catastrophic reality of her situation finally crushing her. "You are completely bankrupt," DeAndre delivered the final devastating blow. "You have no money, no home, and no family left to bail you out. You are going to face the exact same poverty and humiliation you so eagerly inflicted on me." He dropped the divorce papers onto the floor at her feet. They landed right next to the shattered crystal glass and the ruined pieces of Patricia's gold-leafed table. DeAndre did not say another word. He turned his back on his weeping wife. He walked across the marble foyer and approached me standing near the staircase. We did not hug or celebrate. We simply exchanged a quiet look of profound mutual respect. Two survivors who had successfully burned the predators to the ground. DeAndre walked silently out the heavy front doors and disappeared entirely into the freezing dark Chicago night. He left Rachel screaming and sobbing utterly alone on the cold marble floor, completely trapped forever in the permanent ruins of her toxic family and shattered criminal empire. 6 months passed since the night the federal agents marched through my front doors and dragged my husband out into the freezing Chicago air. The transition from chaotic devastation to absolute silence was remarkably swift. Once the government steps in to dismantle a criminal enterprise, the machinery moves with cold, unrelenting efficiency. I spent those months assisting the federal prosecutors, providing every encrypted ledger, every forged document, and every mapped offshore routing number I had painstakingly collected. As a senior financial auditor, my testimony was bulletproof. The defense attorneys representing my former family tried to find cracks in my analysis, but my numbers were absolute. The sentencing hearing took place on a crisp, bright Tuesday morning in late May. The federal courthouse in downtown Chicago was an imposing structure of granite and glass, a fitting arena for the final collapse of Gavin's arrogant delusion. I sat in the second row of the gallery wearing a sharply tailored navy suit. I did not look like a broken, discarded wife. I looked like the executioner who had successfully pulled the lever. When the bass brought Gavin into the courtroom, the physical transformation was shocking. The bespoke tuxedos and $5,000 watches were gone, replaced by a standard ill-fitting orange jumpsuit. His perfectly styled hair was thinning and unkempt. The confident predatory swagger that had defined his entire personality had completely vanished. He looked small, hollow, and utterly defeated. He refused to look in my direction. The federal judge showed absolutely no mercy. Gavin was found guilty on multiple counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and aggravated identity theft. Because he had specifically targeted the generational wealth trusts of elderly clients, the sentencing guidelines were heavily enhanced. The judge handed down a definitive sentence of 12 years in a federal penitentiary, followed by a lifetime ban from any sector of the financial industry. He was also ordered to pay nearly $8 million in mandatory restitution. As the guards placed his hands in cuffs and led him away to begin his decade behind bars, he finally cast one desperate glance toward the gallery. He found no sympathy. He found only the cold, unyielding gaze of the woman he had severely underestimated. Patricia faced a different yet equally devastating brand of justice. Because her defense attorney successfully argued she was primarily manipulated by her son's superior financial knowledge, she managed to avoid a lengthy prison sentence. However, the federal prosecutors did not let her walk away unscathed. Patricia pleaded guilty to conspiracy and forgery. The judge sentenced her to 5 years of highly restrictive federal probation and mandated 500 hours of community service. But the true punishment for Patricia did not come from the criminal court. It came from the Internal Revenue Service. The government systematically seized every single asset connected to her fraudulent holding company. The IRS levied crushing, insurmountable fines against her for tax evasion and hiding offshore funds. They seized her luxury vehicles, liquidated her retirement accounts, and auctioned off the expensive condo she had bragged about. Patricia, a woman who had built her entire identity around wealth country clubs and degrading service workers, was reduced to absolute poverty. She was forced to move into a tiny subsidized studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. The elite social circle she had catered to completely blacklisted her. When she tried to reach out to her former friends for financial assistance, her calls went unanswered. She became a total pariah, forced to live the rest of her life in the exact destitution she had so gleefully planned for me. Rachel experienced her own catastrophic downfall. DeAndre had executed his exit strategy flawlessly. True to his word, the recovery transfer we initiated the night of the gala successfully isolated his $150,000 from the federal seizure pool. With his life savings secure, DeAndre finalized the divorce with lethal speed. Rachel, having willfully tied her identity to her mother's fraudulent shell companies, had all her accounts frozen by the federal government. She tried to fight DeAndre in civil court for spousal support, but the judge threw the case out immediately upon reviewing the evidence of her complicity in the embezzlement cover-up. Stripped of her husband, her home, and her family's stolen wealth, Rachel was forced to face the real world without a safety net. The last I heard from mutual acquaintances, she was working double shifts at a retail clothing store just to make rent on a small apartment she shared with 2 roommates. The designer handbags and expensive sunglasses were long gone. She was finally experiencing the grueling, exhausting reality of the working class she had spent her entire life mocking. The toxic family was completely and thoroughly dismantled. Their greed had been the ultimate architect of their ruin. They had constructed an empire on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and profound arrogance. Believing that their status made them entirely immune to consequence, they thought they could simply take whatever they wanted from the people around them, treating loyalty as a weakness to be exploited. But the moment they attempted to steal from someone who understood the architecture of their deception, the entire structure imploded. I walked out of the federal courthouse that Tuesday afternoon and took a deep breath of the crisp, clean air. The heavy suffocating weight I had carried since the day we bought the estate was finally gone. I walked down the stone steps, my heels clicking rhythmically against the pavement, feeling a profound sense of closure. The ledgers were balanced, the debts were paid, the liabilities were permanently neutralized. I had successfully audited the most dangerous risk of my life, and I had emerged entirely whole. I opened the heavy car door, slid into the leather driver's seat, and smiled. I was ready to return to a beautiful home that was finally, peacefully, irrevocably, and entirely mine. I started the quiet engine and drove away from the courthouse forever. The drive back to the suburbs was the most peaceful journey I had experienced in years. The heavy suffocating anxiety that used to grip my chest whenever I approached the wrought iron gates of my property had completely vanished. I pressed the button on my sun visor. The gates swung open smoothly, welcoming me into a sanctuary that was finally undisputedly mine. The sprawling $1.8 million estate looked different in the warm afternoon sunlight. It no longer resembled a battleground or a fortress hiding domestic criminals. It simply looked like home. I parked my car in the circular driveway and walked around to the expansive backyard patio. The massive stone fire pit was crackling, radiating a comfortable heat against the cool spring breeze. Sitting around the polished teakwood table were the only two men who had proven their absolute loyalty when the world was actively burning down around me. DeAndre looked up from a stack of blueprints and offered a warm, genuine smile. He wore a sharp casual linen shirt, looking rested, confident, and firmly in control of his own destiny. Sitting across from him was Harrison, the retired cybersecurity expert who had sold me this house and handed me the keys to my own salvation. Harrison raised his glass of iced tea in a silent toast as I approached. I took a seat at the head of the table, setting my briefcase down on the wooden surface. I looked at the two of them, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. They were not blood relatives. They were allies forged in the fires of survival. We had all been targeted by the same parasitic family, and we had all emerged victorious by trusting each other. How did the sentencing go? DeAndre asked, closing his blueprint folder and giving me his full attention. 12 years in federal prison, I replied, leaning back in my chair and letting the sunlight warm my face. Patricia got 5 years of probation and total financial liquidation. The Internal Revenue Service seized everything. The ledgers are officially closed. Harrison chuckled a low raspy sound of pure satisfaction. I told you, kid. A man who steals in the dark is completely defenseless when you drag him into the light. I did not do it alone, I said, looking directly at DeAndre. You walked into the lion's den to clone that server. You risked your entire career to secure the evidence we needed. You saved my life, DeAndre. DeAndre shook his head softly. You saved mine, Olivia. You showed me the truth when I was too manipulated to see it. Myself. You kept your promise. My equity is secure and I am finally free to build my own future. Sitting around that patio table, we were actively planning the expansion of our new corporate venture. 2 months ago, the three of us officially launched a highly specialized risk management consulting firm. We combined our unique high-level skill sets to create a corporate defense agency unlike anything else in the Chicago financial sector. Harrison managed the cybersecurity division utilizing his decades of federal experience to expose digital vulnerabilities. DeAndre handled the physical infrastructure and structural auditing, ensuring corporate facilities met the most rigorous safety standards. I served as the chief executive officer and lead financial auditor. We were a powerhouse triad. Our client roster was already fully booked for the next 2 years. Wealthy executives and massive corporations paid us astronomical retainer fees to audit their organizations and destroy insider threats. We took the trauma that Gavin and his mother inflicted upon us and monetized it into a massively lucrative empire. They tried to leave us bankrupt and broken, but they only succeeded in giving us the exact tools we needed to dominate the industry entirely. I poured myself a glass of iced tea and looked out across the pristine waters of the lake. The quiet serenity of the moment allowed me to deeply reflect on the fundamental nature of human relationships. For my entire life, society had conditioned me to believe that family was an unbreakable bond, a sacred pact defined purely by shared DNA. I was taught that you must forgive blood relatives regardless of their transgressions, that loyalty to your family supersedes your own personal safety. Gavin and his mother weaponized that exact belief. They used the illusion of family loyalty as a smoke screen to commit horrific financial and emotional violence. They expected me to simply absorb their abuse. But blood does not equal loyalty. Shared genetics do not automatically grant someone a free pass to exploit your kindness, steal your resources, or destroy your peace. True family is not an accident of birth. It is a conscious daily choice. Family is defined by the people who stand fiercely by your side when the world turns against you. DeAndre and Harrison were my true family now. We shared no blood, but we shared a bond forged in absolute trust. When toxic people show you their true nature, you must believe them the very first time. You must meticulously gather your evidence, secure your assets, and draw boundaries made of solid steel. If someone attempts to burn your life to the ground, you do not hand them a fire extinguisher. You lock the doors, secure the perimeter, and let them choke on their own smoke. My name is Olivia. They called me an incompetent, naive woman. They thought they could strip me of my inheritance and throw me onto the street. Instead, I audited their entire criminal existence, handed them over to the federal government, and kept the mansion. They tried to steal. Sometimes the most beautiful, satisfying karma in the world is simply watching the trash take itself out. Have you ever discovered that the people closest to you were secretly plotting your downfall? How did you confront the toxic individuals in your life who tried to use your kindness as a weakness? I want to hear your stories of survival and absolute victory. Share your experiences in the comment section below. Do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about setting unbreakable boundaries, recognizing the red flags, and fighting back against narcissistic abuse. Remember, you hold the pen that writes your own future. Make sure your signature is permanent. The most powerful response to betrayal is building an extraordinary life without those who sought to destroy you entirely. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and I will see you in the next video.